güneşler doğuyor. Kupkuru bir ağacın dalıyım, yapayalnız. Uzaklarda bir yerlerde bir şeyler kök salıyor. Çatlamış dudağımda ne bir ses ne bir nefes. Uzaklarda bir yerlerde türküler söyleniyor. Dönence, dönence, gün dönendi, dönence, dönence.
Yola çıkmış arıyorum, kaybettim aşkımı. Yola çıkmış arıyorum, kaybettim aşkımı. Ne olur bana ümit verme, seveceksen başkasını. Ne olur bana ümit verme, seveceksen başkasını. Bana toz pembe göründü, sensiz dünyam karanlıktı. Bana toz pembe göründü, sensiz dünyam karanlıktı. Bana senden başka ümit verecek bir kimsem yoktur. Bana senden başka ümit verecek bir kimsem yoktur. İkimiz bir fidanın güller açan dalıyız. İkimiz bir fidanın güller açan dalıyız. Sen benimle, ben seninle bu hayatı yaşamalıyız. Severek birbirimizi hayatta hep gülmeliyiz. Yaşamanın gayesini seni sevince anladım. Yaşamanın gayesini seni sevince anladım. Senden gelen her cefaya bu canımı adadım. Senden gelen her cefaya bu canımı adadım. Bil ki tahammül edemem başka birini sevmene. Bil ki tahammül edemem başka birini sevmene. Sevme benden başkasını, razı değilsen ölmeme. Sevme benden başkasını, razı değilsen ölmeme. İkimiz bir fidanın güller açan dalıyız. İkimiz bir fidanın güller açan dalıyız. Sen benimle, ben seninle bu hayatı yaşamalıyız. Severek birbirimizi hayatta hep gülmeliyiz. Severek birbirimizi hayatta hep gülmeliyiz. Severek birbirimizi hayatta hep... Gemime sevdiğim gider gelir Ömerken. Çayelinden öteye giderim yali yali giderim yali yali giderim yali. Sırtındaki sepetin ben olayım hamali ben olayım hamali ben olayım ha. Sepetimin ipleri keseyi omuzimi keseyi omuzimi keseyi omuz. Aç şu Habeş'te mali göreyim o yüzünü göreyim o yüzünü göreyim o yüzünü.
I have written this story for a white body who will support me, who will protect me. That body will work as a shield in unsafe spaces. Me and that body are in this together. Me and that body trust each other. Me and that body are in this together. And when I say to that body that it is better to sit and be silent as I tell my story, that body will listen. Because I have that body's consent. And as that body helps me to tell my story, All I can wonder is if you will listen. Better to that body than to mine. Better to their story instead of mine. And as I said, the body listens with consent. And I'm grateful that we are in it together. There we go. Good job, babe.
Hello, welcome everyone. The performance you witnessed was by Sarafina Paulina Bonita, and it was from an excerpt from their poem that is also part of the garment that we will talk about later. Please join us, The Desert Rose. Welcome everyone at Auditorium at 10 and also the audience who is joining us online. My name is Chris Dittel and I'm very happy that I can have all the makers of the Shapeshifty garment from the exhibition To Be Like Water on stage with me, which I realize is also the first time we all are together. And besides Sarafina, I have here Sami Hammana, Amy Suo Wu, Huang, and Sandim Mendes, who all contributed to this piece. But before we go into talking about their contribution and the artwork itself, I'd like to say a few words about this exhibition, which opened in December last year and closed immediately. So I'm even more happy that we can be here together and that it's open again. This exhibition also made a long journey. It's supposed to happen in May 2020, and originally it was a commission by Sculpture International, who at the time approached me to curate an exhibition that would reflect on everyday life, cultural life in the city of Rotterdam. And by way of introduction, maybe I will just share a few thoughts I had at the time. And it took me quite a while to arrive to the notion of code switching, which is at the nucleus of this exhibition. And that came from my thinking around and experience in living in Rotterdam, that as a city is oftentimes being celebrated for its multicultural nature and how many languages are spoken in this city. But at the same time, if we look at from say a political perspective or how people experience it, the city, it's also many inhabitants face a lot of violence, and it's not as simple and as joyful as it's oftentimes being heralded. So that was one aspect. I also wanted to make an exhibition that would be besides perhaps not as comfortable notions, would also be a celebration and be joyful and noisy and polyvocal in a way. And here the concept of code switching came quite helpful. That, just to recap briefly, it's originally a linguistic term which means when certain speakers who share different languages would employ all these languages within a conversation and switch between these languages within a conversation. But of course the term also traveled outside of its linguistic concept and also relates to dialect, body language, gesture, movement, that each would signify or signal a kind of mutual understanding of a context, who you are speaking to, and how you can speak or behave. And that manner of speech and behavior can oftentimes be a way of connecting to someone, a way of maybe protecting yourself in some way, or a way of relating to, or a necessity to relate to speaking a certain way that is more present in dominant culture. We have very little time, so I will leave it at that and invite you to visit the exhibition downstairs. And one of the first artists, actually, whom I approached with this idea was Amy Suo Wu, with whose practice I was, at the time, most of all of you familiar with. And I knew you worked around the question of embodied publishing and coding in various ways that is present in garments. So I would like, by way of introduction, ask you first to talk about your artistic practice, and then all the contributors to introduce themselves.
Is this on? Can you? Hello? Yes? Yes? Is it working? Yeah? Hello? Yeah, okay. Just gotta talk louder. Okay. Yeah, so embodied publishing was a kind of framework that I was working around in thinking about, like, how do you publish embodied knowledge? The way I understand embodied knowledge is something that I've been working through within this project as well. But I guess one of the main inspirations were my time teaching in cultural diversity at the William de Koning, and one of the themes that we worked with was embodied knowledges. And a lot of that is grounded upon the fact that without our bodies, we wouldn't be able to sense the things around us. We wouldn't have memories, wouldn't be able to position ourselves, we wouldn't be able to see ourselves as political beings. And I suppose that was the beginning point. But after doing some more research and being, let's say, working through these themes for the last 2 years, I was also thinking through the body as an archive, which is a concept or let's say a notion that Rob Bohm has explored, and he understands it as a kind of, or the body as a carrier or a vessel for memories and sensations and experiences that have been informed by trauma and its effects. And then another idea that really kind of helped me build this idea was the body as a cultural archive. And the cultural archive, I was inspired by Gloria Vecker's understanding, in the sense that she's thinking about the cultural archive as a repository for memory, and how colonial memory, colonial history has informed the way we've structured our views on race. And so body as archive, body as cultural archive has been really pivotal in me thinking about what embodied knowledges can mean. And then, so like, let's say thinking about the body in that sense, but then, okay, so then the body as text, and then how can text also be seen as textile? So like all of these ideas were like the fragments that kind of helped me create this frame, which then was, let's say, the field to work on embodied publication. So how do you publish, how do you make visible all of these things that are experienced within the body, within a specific minority culture, within a majority culture, such as Rotterdam. And then, of course, I invited Sarafina, Sami, and Sandim as the contributors to get them to think about what embodied knowledge, obviously, but code switching, and how code switching was could be seen as a form of embodied knowledge in their contribution to this piece.
Thank you. Maybe I ask then first Sandim to tell us a little bit about your practice, and by way of introduction, just very briefly, or anyone else, if you'd like to start.
I can start.
You don't have to go into your contribution about the work, but I know you work with textile and photography, and I would love to. We also have a few images, I think, that are not visible here, but of your artwork. If you could tell us a little bit about your practice.
Okay. Yes. So my art practice, like the core idea of the core research, what I do is investigating culture identity in and between various cultures. So being Cape Verdean, at home everything is Cape Verdean, but then you are raised in Rotterdam with all these other cultures where you are being exposed to, and what is cultural identity nowadays? That's something that I find very interesting, and I use my own background, my own family as the first inspiration to explore that, and like I have some images. But my art practice is really like driven by it's concept driven. So the idea or the story dictates which medium I use. So it's very different from. It starts from photography, as in I think in images, but it goes into video, textile printing, performances, installations, drawings, printing. So it's like very broad. But it's like the idea or the story actually tells me what medium I should use. That's really the basic.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And then I maybe look at Sami, if you would like to share a little bit about your work in general. I know you are a researcher, and you work oftentimes around the question of various invisible or semi-visible infrastructures that are not so obviously seen. And you oftentimes drift into the philosophical realm too. If you could share a little bit more.
Yeah. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah. Okay. Louder. Okay, I'm going to speak louder. No, you're correct indeed. The majority of the projects I work on have to deal with the idea of the limits of perception. And this can be on the level of a kind of aesthetic visual image. It could be on the level of a textual image. So this is a film that I worked on, which was basically looking into the kind of possible similarity between the vehicles that the Dutch East India Company used centuries ago in relationship to contemporary cable-laying vessels, which kind of like lay the cables on the bottom of the ocean for us to have the internet. The research project, which ended up in this film essay, was kind of basically looking at the kind of visual culture of the contemporary cable-laying vessels, which is a very minimal visual culture, vis-a-vis the sort of like Dutch East India Company's kind of ships, which were adorned with sculptures, symbols, etc., etc. The question that project was essentially asking was, if we don't have any kind of like aesthetic visual access to these conditions, could there still be a form of neo-colonial inheritance in terms of labor politics, in terms of navigational complexities? So in general, I think that this idea of like what is not visible becomes a kind of like interesting sort of possibility to sort of like ask questions and speculate on what that might be. Similarly, in terms of the project that we all worked on collaboratively, the text that I contributed with is also asking this question, essentially, that there is this sort of like system, this kind of like logic, a literacy of a language, of a vernacular language that is not very present, but is operated by bodies that can do this. So in that sense, I think that this notion of the limit of perception is quite present as well. That's just in general what I'm concerned with.
In Sarafina, we have just witnessed your performance, which may not, but perhaps needs some introduction in addition to, I know you work as a performance artist and also you write poetry. And I know you did a larger research on the politics of gaze, and perhaps you would like to share a little bit about that.
I wonder what image is going to pop up from me first. Can you hear me? Yes, amazing. Yes, where to start? Yes, I'm a performance artist. I call myself a poetry writer, but I have started to realize that maybe I'm also just a writer that loves to perform my work as a poet. I think that as an artist, my work touches upon racial bias and gender codes. I work a lot with gender, with the perception of that, with the questions around it from a personal perspective, because I identify as non-binary. And I work with race from a place of ancestry. I write a lot about my father and also my mother, and who is Dutch, and my father is Surinamese, and how they relate to each other, how I relate to them, and how society looks at my body, like physically. That's also what my research from the politics of the gaze was really about. It was about me understanding as an artist and as a performer how my audience sees me and how I always hide myself. I always hide myself and my face. And if I'm not hiding my physical body in my work, I hide myself behind text in a way. I hide behind this idea or this way of speaking that allows me to exist for a certain extent invisibly for others. But I'm hyper visible for my own community. And I think that that is also the thing that really shaped my art practice a lot, is community, like the ballroom scene, voguing, the queer community, the Black community. They have really supported me and allowed me to develop myself as a person, but also really helped me develop my practice in that sense, because they helped me become a better performer. Like ballroom has really helped me change my performances, change how I see my body, and the Black community has learned with me how our ancestry is important and how that should be talked about, and not in the way that is expected in academics, but in a way that comes from us in a sense. And as a writer, that is what I am working on, that's what I'm interested in, that is what I want to protect. I also really believe that in my writing, there is a part of my ancestor to that take over, and that there's a specific way that I want my writing to be done, or what color it is, to also honor them in that sense. So in some ways, I am always performing, but at the same time, I'm not. I'm always in connection with God. I'm religious, I'm a Muslim, but also with my ancestry in that sense. And that has really, shaped my practice in a way that allows me to make work that is in a museum, just like my contribution, but that is also not fully visible for the white gaze. But there's something hidden in there that is especially for my community to only see, and when they see it, that is a really nice moment, and that's what I'm always looking for, like those two types, in a sense, maybe also code switching. So, yeah.
Thank you. And Karen, you're a fashion designer who has a practice very close to textiles. Yeah. And
I think my microphone's not. Is it working?
Talk louder.
Okay, talk louder.
And you joined the group of collaborators, the latest, that gave the final shape and form to this garment.
Yeah.
I also know your practice the least, I think, of all of you.
Oh yeah.
And you shared a few images, which some look more sculptural works.
No, actually, it's I think now I'm trained as a fashion designer, but then after all this fashion practices, I feel very interested in exploring the gray zone between hand craftsmanship and also digital images. So all the images that is showing is from the previous project where me and the guy I collaborate with, Jason Page, we accidentally inherited a bunch of forgotten textile artwork from passed away Dutch artist. Her name is Alma Becks, and her work was about to being thrown away. And then we just kind of try to find a way to represent and repurpose her work in a contemporary way. Yeah, that was the project about. It's actually not this one. I deleted it, but I don't know why they're still here. So this is actually irrelevant to what I was talking about before. It was more the one maybe before or after.
That's all right.
Yeah, this one and the previous one. Yeah, that was her work. Yeah.
Okay, we can go on. I'd like to talk now maybe more specifically about the garment itself, how it came to being, your individual contributions or individual voices in it. It also exists in the exhibition space in 2 iterations, which I think also signals its double function, that is to protect but also to reveal. It's also about visibility. Invisibility are lots of the words that came up already in your introductions. And also the text that is printed on the garment, most of it comes from you, where Amy, I think, operated as an editor of this embodied publication. And someone made this comment to me recently that, oh, but this text, I was reading it, but it's still quite abstract. I didn't really understand. And there is also, you use a lot of fiction in the text. There also introduced these 3 characters in it, the faceless, the counter, and the shaker. And each of you have particular parts of text or particular parts of the physical pieces. The garment exists of the cape itself. There is also a veil, a hat with a veil, and a belt, and small tags that are attached on it and also around it. And maybe we could start by talking about each of these elements. If there is anyone who would like to start, or Amy, if you would like to talk about your role as an editor, because it really functions as a publication. Even it takes there are even biographies of contributors printed on them, and they're your real professional biographies, just as you would do in the end pages of a book.
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me? I feel like, okay. So I have a background in graphic design and publishing, essentially. So I really approached this project, Embodied Publishing, as a kind of publication, but the challenge there was to combine it with a piece of garment. So it should essentially function both as a garment and as a magazine, essentially. And essentially also this is, let's say, the formal materialization of the concept of embodied publishing. And we had a conversation earlier today with Karen and I, and indeed I was the editor, but I was also the designer. And normally when you have a publication, you also get it printed, but we also produced it. And I just have to say there is one person here who was very much a part of the project. Unfortunately, she couldn't be here today. Her name is Hannah Frank, and she was my intern, but actually she was very much involved in the production process as well. And so much of it was like handwork, laborious, arduous labor that she was like so much a part of. She literally bled on it, so blood, sweat, and tears. But yeah, my role as an editor, I don't know, I guess I was also a manager in the sense that I was like emailing everyone, so I was also like the practical role as well. But yeah, I don't think I've worked on such a project for so long. It was 2 years, and it was a very rewarding journey, but it was also very exhausting, like right in the middle of Corona, also teaching all this stuff. So, but I think it was super rewarding, actually. So to kind of juggle artistic vision, logistics, designing, production, and then also making sure that everyone was supported. So
you did a great job. Thank you.
That's something indeed to emphasize, that also the garment or the piece in its development went through a kind of journey, which of course this additional 2 years of the postponement also gave more time to work on it. And I think in this final piece, the text and the textile were really kind of threaded together. I feel like I'm shooting at each of you. Sami, maybe would you like to talk a little bit about the tags that are attached on the garment, and that they signal a kind of vernacular language that is specifically about numbers? Would you like to tell a little bit more about their use and how they circulate, and also what you wanted to do with these tags, because it's also not a dictionary?
No. I mean, I've made dictionaries before, but this is definitely not a dictionary. And the introduction actually really also starts with saying that so the title of the text is Vernacular Numeracy, which basically kind of touches upon a kind of more informal numerical literacy, a kind of understanding of numbers that is spoken in a kind of particular context with a particular group of people that speaks that language, and I'm one of them. It's a Rotterdam straattaal, but then specifically how numbers are articulated and how they're kind of like strung together. And what the text basically does is that it kind of talks more about the sort of like mathematical operations that are possible in grammar. So when you say like one word which represents one number, and then it's followed up by another word with another number, then that might mean an additive kind of mathematical operation. So the text kind of contextualizes this and sort of like tries to make some form of a kind of understanding of it, but also being aware, hopefully at least towards the reader, making it aware to the reader that this is not a definition of what strata in terms of numbers is. We were also talking, Amy and I were also talking about like the kind of like the borders or the limits of a text, and how that could be played with once the text is not printed on a piece of A4 paper, but on a garment instead. So we're also thinking about like how numbers are usually part of a garment, and how these numbers could be kind of also played with in terms of this more kind of vernacular numerical way of talking about these numbers. So, kind of like washing tags, labels, these were also started to be kind of populated by these different forms of talking about numbers. Furthermore, we also worked on this kind of like tab system, where if there, if you would have the garment on, you could also play with this kind of succession of numbers in order to like write grammatically a different kind of number. I don't know, does it make sense? I'm just saying number a lot, I realize. Okay, I guess that makes sense.
Also, you should say that your fictional character is named as the counter in the text or the exhibition explanation. And then we also have the shaker and the faceless.
You didn't know? Oh. I mean, I think it's obvious that I'm the faceless, but...
There's a very beautiful proverb, I was told, that is at the center of your piece, that is the belt, Cape Verdean proverb, that translates loosely, I would tighten my stomach with a tie and bear it. And if you like, you could tell us a little bit about the use of this proverb and how the conceptualization of this belt came about.
Okay, so the proverb, are you hearing me? Okay, yes. So on the back of this belt in the middle, there's like Cape Verdean proverb. It's called Tinkimara corda na barriga pangaguenta. And so I tie a rope around my stomach and I bear it. And in this project, there's several elements that came together, and it was a lot through conversations with Amy, Sarafina, and everyone actually. But it was this idea of embodied knowledge. And I think for me, when I was doing research, trying to understand what does embodied knowledge mean for me personally, then I found out that actually there's a project that I've done in 2008 I think 2008. That's called Batuku, and it was a performance that I did, a performance video, where I was performing a traditional dance, a Cambodian dance. And this was actually for me the first example of embodied knowledge, because in this project I was doing actually visualizing this idea of I'm performing a dance that I've have no knowledge of. And when I was 5, 6, I was there was like this, I think, a wedding party or something, and then these traditional dancers came, and I started to dance on it when I was really young. And I remember my family was really in shock because nobody taught me how to dance it. So for me, I think in 2008 was the first time I just touched the surface of this idea of embodied knowledge, like how can I perform a traditional dance without knowing? And I think through this project, I kind of came back to this idea and was like, okay, that was the first element that I was like, okay, this is where I've done embodied knowledge and I want to delve deeper. And then I was doing research on Batuku and trying to get to know this tradition, like what was the origin of it. And there was a lot of interesting things, and it's really just a small bit that I got to know, and it was this idea of these women who were dancing in the circle. They were like the spokes. That was a moment for them to really speak out. That was a moment for them to actually be the communicator of the community and be the voice of the women in around this time. So this performance is also done by putting a scarf around their tummy. So when someone is asked to be part of the circle, they will get the scarf and put the scarf around their tummy, and then they become the spokesperson. And so they sing, and they sing in a coded language, and they sing about, I mean, it was a dance that was originated in a time of slavery, a moment where they could really talk about their conditions and all these things that was going on. So that was a thing that came out. And then I was like, okay, I was also doing a research project on Cape Verdean proverbs, how it's used in the Cape Verdean culture, and how men are using it differently than women, and it's also a project that I'm doing. So while I was doing this research project, like before, there was also this saying that came when I was doing research about Cape Verdean proverbs, and there this saying came out. I would tie a rope around my tummy and bear it. So all these things came together, and I was like, okay, these women were putting this rope around their tummy to kind of get through a difficult condition, a difficult situation. And for me, code switching through conversation with Amy, I realized that was actually something that I was trying to do in my own culture. Trying to speak the language that's not mine, so in order to be seen by my own family, by my own culture in that sense. So for me, this thing came through of code switching in your own culture. I think that was something that I came to know, like, okay, this is actually something that I've been doing unconsciously in all my projects. Am I explaining it well? Yeah, so I think all these elements came together, and then, I mean, I have a very intuitive practice where working intuitively next to research, so a lot of things I've decided to do follow intuitively. So the images of this first work in 2008, I actually used in like me doing this sequence. This is actually the only thing that I still have left from this project. And these images of the video. So for me, it intuitively, I was like, the sequence, performing this dance, me code switching in a way, in this culture, performing this traditional dance that is not really mine. So it was just follow intuitively, speaking with Amy a lot, and then, yeah, I thought, like, how can this idea be part of this garment, where actually when you code switch, I saw this as a form of then you bear it, you just tie it around your belly. Does it make sense? Yeah?
Absolutely, thank you. So all the elements of this garment are functionally and conceptually also very much tied together, like in the belt or in the tags. And also they have these complex notion that they are at the same time not documenting something, but they embody so many of these various experiences and layers. So, but the next element is what we call oftentimes a head, but in fact it's a veil. And when we were discussing this performance, there was also, we talked about if it should be performed by you, or if it should be performed by a white person who would be then channeling your thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this channeling is also something important in your practice. If you'd like to talk about that and the headpiece in general.
Mm. Yeah, I think that I always do a shout out to Clara because she's the one that like introduced me to this idea of like channeling with your body. That was back when I was studying at Willem de Koning, and I actually, with her blessing, developed it further. So I felt very unsafe in my process in art school and also on the street. I wore hijab for a very long time, and also as a trans person it was quite interesting to move my body and to find my place in public spaces. And yet again, like my community was that place where I could find home, and also within the school with other specific bodies, I would find that I would be seen in a different way, or I would be able to hide myself and feel safe. And like this idea of channeling actually became something that I did for my assessments with a very, very dear friend of mine called Eline Groen. And I would send her to the assessments, and she would have an earpiece in, and we would hide a phone under the table. We would prepare everything beforehand. And when the teachers would come in, they would be like, "Waar is Sarafina? Where's Sarafina?" And I would answer, "I'm here." But they would hear Elina speaking. And it was the first time it was really interesting. It took a moment for them to get it. They were like, "What is happening?" And you know, like some people can also say it in a sense that it's a bit like possession, and like coming back to like Surinamese culture and how we are connected to our ancestors, and how we, in some senses, also allow them to possess us in certain rituals that also like tied back to it. And I found it quite interesting how connected actually afterwards me and Elina became. Like she would know what I was thinking all the time. Like if we would be in a space together, we would automatically know how we felt. And it was how we felt. It was not how we separately from each other felt, but we were one entity. And she was really my protection in the school and also in a lot of events. And I think that that work was not really understood and also respected in the way for what it is that it does when I was showing that inside my school, but when I was also talking with Amy about this idea of code switching with the body and how that can be a different body, or how that can be a shield, and also how hijab for me was that shield. That brought actually like this shape in a sense together. And again, this idea of like not showing my face, because you can actually roll it up and then tie it, and then you're visible, but you can put it down. And also the text that is actually on the veil is the performance from me and Elina. It is the script that I read with her, and it is the choreo and the instruction that I give to her of what she should do and what is to be expected. And you know, like it's not like a contract, but it's like this sort of like extra, like heart under the belt, heart under the riem, for her to understand what is going to happen, and that we are in it together. And actually, when the garment was finished, we were not thinking that we were going to perform it anymore. The whole time, Amy and I were like, we're going to perform. But then as everything continued with COVID, we were like, okay, maybe not. And now I got a chance to do it. And it's also a great way to explore what is possible with the garment, because now I took it off and I was talking to the garment in a sense, and the garment is talking back to me, because maybe for that moment, the garment is the shield. The garment is the white body that I put on. But in other moments, it can also be that I want to put it on because I want to be able to move in public spaces and in institutional spaces feeling strong and safe and protected. And that is really what Shapeshifty, like emotionally also has done for me, and that's also what it represents.
And finally, maybe I would like to ask Karen and Amy about the making of this piece and how it took this form. It's also a little bit like a blanket, apart from being a shield. It's soft, but also it's rather heavy.
And it's hot.
So if you would have some additional thoughts to share about that,
Yeah.
design decisions.
All the decisions. I mean, Amy came to me with all the ideas from all the collaborators, and also the first sketch she had, and then it was like about a garment and publication. So then, and then her practice focused on the publishing. So then I was like thinking, like, wouldn't it be very interesting to make it extremely literal, just to combine these two directly together? And that's how we come up with this idea of the garment. And I mean, because like when she was talking about publishing and publication, so then she was telling me a lot about like how practically it is made. So you can see that in the detail, there are lots of like this eyelet, and this is all inspired by the Japanese binding, book binding, yeah. And for the like materials and everything, it's like, because we want to kind of give the feeling of like protected and safe, and also the arming feeling. So everything is like slightly shining, to give the feeling of like army feeling. Do you have something to add?
Yeah, the making. Oh my God! I suddenly have
there
like
are also
a.
these embroidered shapes in
Oh
it.
yeah,
Yes.
but you couldn't really see
there?
from
Yes.
here, right? The embroidery bar. Yeah.
Yeah, we need a photo from the other side. I think from the very beginning, with Sami and Sarafina and Sandim, we were talking. For some reason, there was a lot of military gear, because I was thinking a lot about security, protection, and in relation to code switching as a form of survival, I was thinking about defense, military gear, and that was kind of really somehow on my mind. And then we were thinking a lot about different forms of armor. So we had come across this sub-Saharan African armor that was actually padded. It looked like a quilted armor that was this beautiful tunic, and so that was another inspiration. And of course you have like the medieval European armor, which is like this metallic crazy thingy, which we all recognize. So like all of these ideas came into the materialization of this. I mean, a lot of the material was taken from these inspirations, but I think the genius of Karen is that she was able to marry all of these like ideas, these complex and complicated. Maybe complex is too advanced. It's just it was a lot of ideas, and she was able to kind of bring it together in this very unified and very efficient way, actually, that could tell a story. Of all of these different references, and also to be able to place all of these contributors' pieces in a way that correlated to the site of publishing in which they wanted to have it on. So it was really like a jigsaw puzzle to put it together. And of course, then there was the labor.
There's something I can add. Like I think throughout this process, safetiness is a kind of like the feeling that you gave it to me, because I supposed to kind of like focus more on like production work, but then like Amy was very nice, so she gave me a lot of space to push the project very far. So there was lots of labor work involved, thanks to Hannah, her intern. So she kind of helped us to realize all this like complicated and labor-intensive hand embroidery work, which is on the back side, so you couldn't really see from here. Yeah. And that was it was a really nice experience to collaborate together. Yeah.
You have to give like enormous credit to Amy, also in the production part of my piece, because at the end, a lot of things at the same time was happening, and I had to be like, Amy, I need help, because I mean, I'm doing textile printing, I've done these things, but I've never made like an actual piece of garment or anything, so I was getting troubles like with embroidery, stuff like that, and Amy was just, I think, my Karen in that sense, because you really brought it to life. I mean, there were some parts that, like even what you see on this side, like those things Amy came up with, like it was supposed to be a text that I wanted to embroider, but hand embroider, but a lot of things went wrong, but all things went also right in the end, because Amy came with this idea of Morse code, to put Morse code on the side. So it was really like, for me, the first time doing a collaboration. Like I work mostly like alone, but this was the first time I was doing collaboration where I could really see like how how you can be together in the same space and owning space, but giving each other space. And Amy was like, patch off.
No, I think for me as well, that Amy, you have really helped me shape the faceless. Amazing. Thank you, Amy.
Powerhouse of this project. At the introduction, I sort of blurted out a definition and the interpretation of mine of code switching, but it's of course also very compressed and way of explaining that. But I was wondering if you would like to, any of you, add to that, or even think about code switching from your perspective or from your interpretation. I'm not going
We're
to
all like,
you already touched upon that a few times.
I don't know why I'm starting, but okay. Because I will be the least talking. But this just, for me, it was something very interesting, because I just came back from doing a residency in Portugal, and I was doing a lot of Portugal, Lisbon, and I was doing a lot of like mainly research there. And there was this conclusion at the end that I was really thinking about this project again, where in this project I was thinking about, okay, I have to do code switching in order to be seen. But there I had at a certain point this thing that I refused to code switch. How ambiguous this sound, but it was this thing with language. I was, because I don't speak Portuguese, I speak Criollo, and mainly Dutch. So I was like a little bit, like a lot of struggling there, and I was just trying to speak Criollo because I was like, it's a bit Portuguese, you should understand me. And then they really refused. A lot of people were like, no, you should speak Portuguese. And then this thing came from coaching. I was like, at a certain point, was getting a little bit pissed, because I was like, okay, I refuse to speak Portuguese, as a Cape Verdean, descendant, slave, blah, blah, all these layers of being in this country. And then for me, this thing of, okay, now I don't want to be seen. I want you to see me how I am. This Cape Verdean person that came to your country and like this. So that for me was like coming back exactly, this whole project.
Yeah, I think I can also add to that actually, since we started working on this project and how it has continued until this moment, that actually I have also realized that code switching does not always have to be, I don't want to say that it's always negative, but it is perceived in a way most of the times when you explain it to people that it is about how you switch to survive. That is also how it is explained a lot for like people of color and black people, as a tool to be able to pass to a certain extent in spaces. And funny enough, actually, like in the ballroom scene, we also code switch a lot. We switch from gender, and I was talking with Amy about this a lot, like all the time. I'm always telling Amy that she should come and walk best dressed, like. But also like now, being in the scene longer and walking myself a lot more and being surrounded by more of my community members, I also started to realize that the code switching there goes beyond gender, but that it's also displaying with how you can change your body, how you become a performer in a sense, and how the moment I come somewhere and somebody says serving face, my face immediately changes. My whole energy changes, and that is also a code switch in a sense, and that actually in ballroom they use it for their own pleasure. They have fun with it, you know, like they play with it. They take part of heteronormativity and of outside society, and they fuck it up in a sense, and they rework it, and they keep asking questions. And that was for me like a very nice way to look at code switching, in a sense that it's not like, oh, you have to do it, or no, I refuse to do it, but it's like, oh, it can also be really fun to explore my own body, or like the bodies with us together, or how we speak, or how we do our things, and like reclaim it in a sense.
I think it's hard
Drop
to
the
follow
mic.
up in this. That's a waste of
We're all like, we're all like.
That's right. It's a navigational tool, I think, and for me, it's mainly kind of a navigational tool that allows you to read a certain space, a certain group of people, and to change and mobilize a different vocabulary accordingly. You know, when I'm out on the street and I run into a friend from high school, you know, we speak strataal. I come into this building and my language completely changes, and I'm not completely sure what it does, but like I think it ultimately has to do with what one thinks a space is, how one reads a space, and how one mobilizes language to develop conviviality or allies, and yeah, I think that's kind of what it is for me, I suppose. Yeah.
I think code switching, you can also apply it on clothing. For example, in this occasion, people on the stage try to put on the most beautiful clothing we can have. So then you feel kind of more empowered on the stage. And then in daily life, in your private life, you'll put on cozy clothing, so then you feel comfortable. So I think that maybe code switching is also it's a way of empowering, but it's also a way of blending into a society, so you feel more like you feel the acceptance from your surrounding. Yeah, and I do think that clothing has the same power.
Yeah, amazing, thank you. I mean, for me, like code switching, for me it really relates to steganography, which is body of work that I did previously, and it's essentially like hiding in plain sight. So there is this play with visibility and invisibility, and for me, I think that's precisely the reason why Chris invited me to join this project, is because of my explorations of code and of secret language, of what it means to be excluding and including certain audiences with specific types of messages encoded on paper, on clothing, etc. But I really see code switching as a form of embodied steganography. So what does it mean for you to walk around where you try to hide yourself, make yourself invisible when you feel unsafe, or you come out of that and reveal yourself when there is a certain need to. And so for me, that's how I related to code switching, through this idea of embodied steganography. And what does it mean for me as a person of color to grow up in China, to then, born in China, grew up in Australia, and now being in Holland, to having to always switch to fit into certain circles, to fit into different spaces. And I was doing it so kind of unconsciously that I a few years ago, I realized that I had been doing that because of Chris, because there was this new terminology that came into my life, and I was like, holy fuck, I've been code switching my whole life. And I think maybe for many of us, this term resonated in that sense, that was like, we had been all doing it, but we didn't realize the framework, or I don't know, that's my words, maybe you will put it in your own words, but And so when I realized, I was like, oh wow, this is something that I suppose a lot of people do consciously, which is like what Sarafina was saying in the ballroom scene. When you do it and you take it with power and you play with it and it becomes exploratory. And so I think a lot of the work was trying to explore all these different experiences of like being deliberate or undeliberate, and what does it mean to also, you know, use it as a tactical weapon also. Yeah, that was it.
Thank you, Amy. How are we with time? Do we have still some time for possible questions?
It's 38.
Okay. Maybe some quick questions from the audience or from the online audience. Perhaps someone would like to ask. I can run around with the microphone. Oh.
Thank you.
Oh.
Is it working? I'm kidding.
Great.
Thank you so much for sharing your work. So you were talking a lot about things that are very immaterial in a way, like embodied knowledge, archives, feelings, things that are conducted in a way that is not necessarily tactile. And you also mentioned archives. And I find it really hard to talk about these things still today in institutions, because you're always going to be like, I don't know if it's even mansplained, but like patriarchically, philosophically mansplained into like terms like empirical experience, you mean? I was like, no, embodied knowledge. It's very different. But I was wondering if you could say a little bit about your own positions in the making of an archive that is not existing yet, that is like in the making, and that is like, facing all these challenges of not using measurements that are demanded when one does research.
I feel like Sami, you could answer this.
No, it's a very hard one, and I'm curious on what you mean with archive actually. Do you mean a kind of more personal archive, or?
The accumulation of information, or how you can find information. You know, like if I would like to find, I just mean I wish that I was in school right now, so I could have access to artists who are doing the kind of work that you're doing. So there is no access to certain kinds of information. So archive actually could be to your understanding of where to find what is documented, what is not documented, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. We feel challenged. We feel so challenged.
Maybe I can start, and I mean, unless you have something to say.
Yeah, I can have a quick sentence. Yeah, no worries. No, I was also mainly thinking about this in terms of one's position in an institution and what one could do in order to have a space of some sorts where you feel that there are allies. And I think that's the only thing that I've experienced in that regard is that it's a painstakingly long process, right? It's a painstakingly long process of actually having the bodies be properly paid and in the building and have the time to actually kind of collaborate on these questions. And I think it quite often also has to go with notions of infiltration and tricking, which also links to the idea of Shapeshifty as this kind of cunning, figure of some sorts. And that's all I have in my head right now. Sorry. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't
No, please don't. No, please don't. No, it's great to think about, for sure. Yeah.
Maybe I can, because I brought up body as archive, so I'm sorry for unloading that on all of you, but I think what I mean by that, or I'm trying to wrap my head around that, is again reflecting on my experiences as a teacher and teaching alongside of Tiana Boston Mama, who's my colleague and my friend, but and drawing a lot from our collaboration together, teaching, and her position as a, what is it, like the person who accepts students? What's that role?
Admissions?
Admissions, thank you. And also teaching in Willem de Koning, which is situated in Rotterdam, where it's the most diverse city. However, it doesn't reflect in the student population, and so a lot of the students that come in, the white students, it's majority white students. I think it's now slightly changing, but a lot of them have like knowledge, archive knowledge of the certain cultural contexts that immigrant children or working class children don't necessarily have, and they have to they come in with they have a whole body of knowledge, but they don't necessarily have the same kind of knowledge as these more privileged kids do. And so a lot of the thinking around body as archive is that you do have to validate their experiences, their memories, their cultural backgrounds as equally valuable, and that you can bring it into a classroom and not only Mondrian and Pizza or like all of these other cultural references that they don't necessarily have. So it really comes from this idea that we all have experiences and we can all bring them to the table and have equal conversation and discussion. If that makes sense.
Can I? Because I can. For me, this was actually something that was. I graduated 10 years ago from Willem de Koning. I mean, 10 years ago, we didn't have, as a fourth year, you could, graduate in having a minor as cultural diversity. There wasn't that kind of conversation. And like I said, I'd done a work a little bit about it in 2008, and I graduated in 2010. I didn't have, this knowledge, this I couldn't have these conversations with my teachers or even with the institute about this personal, actually, it was an intuitive, personal thing that I was trying to understand, but not having the theory to back it, not having the knowledge, basically. So it was really many years later that I had to create it myself in a certain way, but mostly starting from my own personal background and then having that as an example to then finding more information about it. So that has really shifted. I mean, I'm also one of the tutors at Willem de Koning, and I'm having third year students that are really graduating in that. I'm like, oh, you're so lucky in the sense, because they're having all these things now, at the time not. So I don't know if that is answering your question from my point of view in a sense, but I'm now doing all this research because I didn't have that at that time.
I am one of those lucky students, actually.
Yeah, I didn't have all these knowledge. I didn't have these type of conversations 10 years ago.
Yeah, I think for me, I graduated in 2020, and there's a huge difference, and Sandim and I have talked about that a lot, what it was like for her at Willem de Koning. And I also teach at Willem de Koning now. We all teach at Willem de Koning. And I think that actually what was quite interesting for me as an artist is that I have always it is actually through you, Mariana, that I came across this idea of willfulness, and that I started actually implementing my own personal experience as a source in my writing that was way more valuable than the academic sources that I was using. And I also clearly state that, and as I was, for example, finishing my master's thesis, I stated it again, that I'm the main source that I use is my lived experience, from which point I talk. And I really, really hope, but I also really want to believe that this is the beginning of academics and institutions changing, in a sense that they allow also their students to be able to talk about their experiences, that it is valued the same way, but that also exactly in these more academic frameworks, it becomes also a part of the norm that you can do that you can use your own stories to be able to tell something, that you can use exactly that embodied knowledge, but also ancestry. That is something that maybe you want to write about or that you want to talk about. And I think that in that sense, the archive, the archive that I have inside of myself needed to be unlocked. I could not do that while I was still at Willem de Koning. And I mean, I don't know, like you had a bit the same thing, but I think it is very important to be surrounded by people that understand you, because Stiana Boston-Mama was my thesis supervisor, and she was the reason that I felt safe enough and sort of allowed to write a thesis, but write with very, very difficult grammar for starters and no pronouns, but also with my personal experience as a main source of how I was gonna make my case. So, and it takes time. It's horrible to say it also, but it takes time. So, but there's a change, you know? So.
Maybe I just thank you so much, all of you, for sharing your practice individually and also the collaborative project. It feels like it could have taken much longer, but it was really nice to hear. And I want to ask this question not as a provocation, maybe just as a maybe just to hear some speculation, but also maybe it relates to this question about the archive, because I wanted to ask very simply what, because garments persist, somehow amazingly textile persists as a material, but also in its in their functionality, I think garments really have the potential. I mean, they move through many generations, or they move past many bodies, or through, or they're worn by many people. And I'm wondering, not needing a concrete answer, but I just wonder where this garment goes next, or what the, maybe to speculate on like the lineage, the future lineage of the garment. Because I think there's also that question about the archive too, is that how to keep that archive accessible. And maybe this is where Mariana was touching on as well. And perhaps it's easier to talk about it through how the material travels, rather than through, or because that is how the ideas travel, or how they stay. But feel free to pass. I know maybe it's an unfair question also.
So on a very pragmatic level, I will tell you where it's going to travel next. It's going to go to State of Fashion Biennale in Arnhem in July. But I guess more figuratively, that's a question that we all have to discuss together, I suppose. And I don't know if we've had a moment to reflect upon that. But yeah, if you guys want to jump in.
I think that
Don't you think that
oh no, go ahead.
don't you think that if a piece, an existing piece that is already made, that is just by existing, is already traveling, right?
I think, yeah.
Yeah, so it doesn't really, even if it's just like in a place, that it is still sort of traveling.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And now I just have to think about like Sarafina's performance and how I think at the next event, I think there will be another opportunity to activate it, and I think that's really exciting, because now the piece is made and we saw a little snippet of how it can be activated, and I think that would be the next, let's say, chapter of the work, how it can make public in various different capacities in different spaces with different performances. I think now it's a book and it's ready to be read. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it will transform. That's what I wanted to say. I think that the garment will be as they are, they'll be the Shapeshifty. So when it needs to perform, it will perform, and when it needs to be read, it will be read. And as Karen said, I also believe that it will travel, and the garment will do what it has to do.
Thank you so much. I think we run out of time, and please give an applause to our guests, and thank you for being here tonight. And thank you for coming in person or joining us online, and for Ken for hosting us.
Ta-da!